Hello, my dear friend. Welcome to tonight's gentle story. My name is Tony, and it is my deepest joy to be here with you tonight. To be the voice that gently guides you into rest. Tonight we are going to step into a story unlike any other. A story that will take us away from the weight of the day into a quiet, windswept world where time moves slowly and mystery drifts like grains of sand. Before we begin, I invite you to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Your gentle support helps this cozy corner grow so that more souls can find peace and sleep in stories like this one. Now, close your eyes if you haven't already. Take a deep breath. Let it out slowly and allow the stillness to carry you. Let's begin. The Woman in the Dunes. It was summer. The kind of summer that presses into your skin. The kind where the air is thick and shimmering and the sun never seems to tire. Far from the city, away from the clamor of horns and hurried steps, a man wandered beneath the heat. His name was Nicky Junpei, a quiet man, thoughtful, solitary. By trade he taught junior high biology, but in his heart he was a collector of beetles, of rare insects, of the strange and beautiful things most of us pass without a second glance. He had taken a few days of leave to visit a remote village by the sea. There, among the dunes, he had heard lived a species of insect unknown to science. And so, carrying only a satchel, his notebooks a net, and a heart full of quiet curiosity, Junpei walked into the soft golden world of sand. The village was not on any proper map. To reach it, he took a small train and then a bus that wound through empty roads flanked by whispering pines. He asked questions along the way. People were kind though vague, as if the village existed more in memory than in geography. When he arrived, he found little more than a scatter of wooden houses, weather-beaten and half swallowed by the dunes. The wind never stopped. It combed the sand into soft ridges and steep drops. It filled shoes, pockets and eyes. The sand was everywhere alive, moving, endless. Junpei introduced himself to a few of the locals, explaining his search for beetles. They watched him with mild interest, his net, his earnestness. Then one of them said, "You'll need a place to stay. There's a woman who lives in the dunes. She has space. You can stay with her." It was nearing dusk. The sun dipped low, casting long, sleepy shadows. And so Junpei followed. They led him to the edge of a great hollow, where the earth fell away in a steep bowl of sand. At the bottom, nestled like a secret, was a small hut, part wood, part canvas. The only way down was a rope ladder swaying slightly in the breeze. Junpei hesitated. It was odd, certainly, but he was tired, and the villagers, they smiled. So gripping the ladder, he began to descend. The woman was waiting for him. She looked to be in her late 30s, slim, quiet, with kind eyes and rough hands. The kind of hands that worked always. Her home was simple but clean. There was water, a pot of food warming, and soft bedding in the corner. Outside, the wind hissed like a whisper through the sand. "You're welcome," she said, her voice low and even. "You can stay the night. In the morning, the rope will be there." Junpei smiled politely. He thanked her, ate a little, and sat quietly by the dim light of an oil lamp, jotting down notes in his book. That night he lay on the straw mat and listened to the sand brushing the walls, to the deep quiet between gusts, to his own breath growing slower. He thought of the beetles he might find tomorrow. He thought of the climb back up the ladder, of the city waiting for him beyond the dunes. But morning had other plans. The morning came not with a fanfare of birdsong or light streaming through windows, but with a slow grey silence, the kind that presses gently against the skin and lets you know the world has changed. In some quiet way, Junpei awoke to the familiar creak of wind against sand and the faint metallic whisper of the rope ladder above. He sat up stretching, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, and let his feet touch the cool, packed sand floor. The woman was already awake. She moved like someone long accustomed to routine, gathering buckets, tying cloth around her face to keep the dust out. Her eyes met his for a moment, calm, unreadable. "Breakfast," she said simply, placing a small bowl of miso and a wedge of rice beside him. He ate quietly, grateful, still thinking about the insects he might find that day. But when he looked up, something stirred inside him. A flicker of unease, a ripple in the silence. He stepped outside the hut and looked up toward the lip of the pit, where the rope ladder should have hung, swaying gently in the morning breeze. It was gone. The edge of the sand bowl towered above him, too steep to climb without help, too smooth, too shifting. He called out, but only the wind answered. He turned back to the woman. "The ladder," he said, forcing a calm tone. "It's been taken away." She didn't flinch, didn't even look surprised. "They'll bring it back," she said softly, brushing sand from a bucket. "They usually do." But when he asked, she shrugged. "When it's needed." There was something disquieting in her answer, too vague, too resigned, like someone who had asked those same questions once and stopped asking. He spent the next hour pacing, eyes darting upward, looking for footprints, voices, any sign of the villagers. Nothing. Only the sand, endless, shifting, indifferent. As the sun rose higher, the heat became thick again, and the woman offered him a small shovel. "You'll need to help," she said gently. "If we don't clear the sand each day, the house will disappear by nightfall." Junpei blinked. Surely she was joking. This wasn't his responsibility. But she looked at him again with those quiet eyes. Not cruel, not pleading, just certain. And so against every instinct, Junpei took the shovel. Hour by hour they dug, filling buckets, lifting them with ropes to unseen hands above. Sweat mixed with dust, muscles ached, the sky burned. And all the while, the same questions circled in his mind. Why? Why would anyone choose to live like this? That night he asked her, not accusingly, but with genuine confusion. Why do you stay here? Why not leave? She paused, then replied, this is my home. The sand is always here. If I leave, someone else will be sent in my place. The sand doesn't stop just because I walk away. The words settled into him like silt. Heavy, inescapable. Later, he lay awake listening again to the wind. It no longer sounded like a whisper. It sounded like breathing. Slow, rhythmic, endless. The pit no longer felt like a temporary stay. It felt like something older. Something that had been waiting for him. And as the darkness folded around him like soft cloth, two questions drifted into the quiet. Who had taken the ladder? And did they ever mean to bring it back? Junpei had always loved order. Insects followed rules. They lived by patterns, habitat, purpose, instinct. Even their wings folded in symmetry. But now, nothing made sense. 3 days had passed. Or was it 4? Time in the pit moved like wind through sand, measured not by clocks, but by how much was shoveled and how much returned. Each morning Junpei awoke to the same breathless quiet. Each night he collapsed, salt-dried and sunsick, into sleep that barely held. Still no rope, still no word from the villagers. And the woman, she continued untroubled, as if life had always been this narrow loop of dust and duty. But now he had begun to watch her differently. She wasn't just surviving. She had adapted. Her hands moved with an elegance that came from repetition, not resignation. She knew the dunes like a second language, how they shifted where they collapsed, how to keep them at bay just enough to breathe another day. Once he caught her humming as she worked. That unsettled him more than the silence. That night, after another dinner of sun-dried fish and pickled root, Junpei finally confronted her, the question pressing like heat against his chest. "Are you keeping me here?" he asked. The woman didn't look up. She placed the last of the dishes in a cloth-lined box, then turned to him. "No," she said, "but I won't help you leave either." A beat of silence. Why his voice was quiet, barely above the wind. She looked past him toward the sloping wall of sand that surrounded them. Then she said softly, "Maybe it's not about leaving. Maybe it's about learning why you were brought here at all." That answer sat in his stomach like a stone. He told himself it was nonsense, some strange rural superstition, or perhaps her own way of coping with being trapped. But part of him, the quiet part, the one that listened late at night, started to wonder. He began searching. He paced the hut, dug into the sand at the corners. He tapped at boards, peeked behind cloth, examined her water jars. He found nothing. Nothing but sand. Always sand. One afternoon, while she rested in the shade, he tried to climb the wall. The sand gave way beneath his feet. One step forward, two sliding down. It filled his shoes, clawed at his legs, burned in his eyes. By the time he reached halfway, he was panting, coughing. And when he looked up, all he saw was the sky and the brief illusion of freedom. Just out of reach, he slid back down defeated. When she looked at him, she said nothing, only passed him a cup of water. The next morning, she handed him a small mirror. "Your face is peeling," she said. He stared at his reflection. Skin blistered and cracked, eyes darker than he remembered. A man no longer entirely himself. That night he didn't sleep. He lay awake listening not to the wind, but to something deeper, a pulse. The sand, he realized, was not just land. It was alive, and it was watching. A question rose in him like a whisper he couldn't silence. Was the pit only a prison? Or had it always been a trap set just for him? The days bled together, soft-edged and pale. Junpei no longer counted them. Instead, he counted other things. The number of buckets lifted. The number of shovelfuls he hauled before his back began to ache. The number of times the woman glanced at the sky but said nothing. Outside, the dunes moved like slow waves. Never the same shape twice, but always returning to swallow what had been cleared. Inside the hut, time no longer passed. It settled. He found himself adapting. His muscles grew leaner, his hands tougher, his complaints quieter. At night, after the digging was done, and the last of the sand was brushed from their skin, the woman would sit cross-legged by the lamp, knitting, sometimes humming, a lullaby he didn't recognize. One evening, she spoke without looking at him. "You could have left, you know," she said. Junpei blinked. "What do you mean?" "That first night," she said, "before the ladder was gone. You could have left then." He stared at her. The thought hadn't occurred to him before. He had assumed the ladder was always taken by someone else. But what if it had always been a choice? His heart stirred with a strange discomfort, a quiet kind of guilt. Had he walked willingly into the pit believing he was a victim, when in truth he had been complicit? "I didn't know," he said at last. She nodded gently. "Most people don't." The wind picked up again outside, scratching softly at the boards, as if the sand were listening. That night he dreamed, not of escape, but of sand falling endlessly from his palms, like time he couldn't hold on to. He woke in darkness, the taste of salt on his lips, his body tangled in sweat-damp sheets. The woman stirred beside him, not alarmed, not surprised. "You're changing," she said. He didn't answer, because part of him knew it was true. He was changing, not just his body, but his thoughts. There were moments now, brief but real, when he forgot about the outside world, when he didn't think of trains or schedules or classrooms. Moments when the sound of the sand, its breathing, its weight, its rhythm, became almost comforting, and that more than anything frightened him. Later, while sifting through his old notes, he came across a sketch he had made on the first day. A beetle delicately drawn, labeled with care. He stared at it. It felt like something left behind by another person. A man who once believed he was just passing through, but now passing through what? A trap, a test, a mirror. He stood outside the hut, watching the stars between the slopes of the dune walls, and wondered, not for the first time, was this place really meant to hold him? Or was it meant to reveal him? The days grew warmer. Or maybe it was him burning slowly from the inside. Junpei had stopped asking questions. Not because he had answers, but because the silence had begun to soothe him. Routine blurred the edges of resistance. Morning, shovel, sand. Evening, rice, rest, repeat. The woman said little, but her presence grew larger somehow. Not in size, but in gravity. She moved through the space like someone who belonged, and that unsettled him. Then one afternoon, everything changed. It was subtle at first. A creak above the pit. A flicker of shadow just for a moment passing along the rim. Junpei looked up. The ladder was back. Rough rope, wooden slats, hanging just out of reach, swaying as if it had never been gone. His heart kicked against his chest. This was it. His chance. The woman noticed his gaze but said nothing, only wiped her hands on a cloth and turned back to her quiet chores. "Did you know they'd return it?" he asked, breathless. She shrugged. "Maybe they want to see what you'll do." He stared at her. "You don't care if I go." "I care," she said softly. "But caring doesn't mean holding on." That night he couldn't sleep. He paced the sand outside the hut, eyes fixed on the ladder, his freedom hanging like a dream above him. It was real, tangible, and yet he hesitated. He thought of the woman, of her quiet voice, of the way her hands had patched his shirt, the way she always saved him the warmest part of the meal. He thought of the sand, how it moved, how it waited, how it knew him now. But he also thought of Tokyo, of streets and lights and strangers, of clean floors and no shovels, of names spoken without sand between every word. Before dawn, he made his decision. He gathered water, food, a bit of cloth. He whispered a thank you she wouldn't hear. And then, with aching limbs and a pounding heart, he climbed. The ladder bit into his palms. The wind rose with him stronger the higher he went. He could see the rim now, so close. And then, his hand touched air, solid ground. He pulled himself up, stood turned, and stopped. The village was gone. The dunes stretched endlessly, rolling, rising, falling. No houses, no roads, only sand and sky. He turned in a slow circle, heart thundering. There was nothing. No direction. No signs. No escape. Only the wind and the dunes and the strange feeling that they were watching him. He dropped to his knees, breath shallow. The rope ladder swayed gently behind him, inviting, mocking. Minutes passed, or hours, and then he began to descend, back into the pit, back to the woman, back to the world that somehow now made more sense than the world above. She was waiting, not surprised, not triumphant, just there. You saw it, didn't you? She asked. He nodded. There's nothing. Sometimes, she said, nothing is exactly what people need to see. And as he lay down that night, the air warm against his skin, the sand settling softly around the house, a new question echoed gently through the silence. Was it the pit that changed him? Or had this version of himself always been waiting beneath the surface? Something shifted after that morning. Junpei stopped thinking of the pit as a prison. He no longer counted the days, no longer tested the walls, no longer asked about the rope. Instead, he began to observe. Like the insects he once studied, he turned his gaze now inward, to the patterns of the sand, the behavior of dust, the quiet language of movement. He carved small furrows into the ground, set traps for particles, measured moisture in the air, drew diagrams with sticks like a man creating scripture in the dirt. Each morning the woman would watch him. She didn't interrupt. She didn't ask. But sometimes she'd bring water before he asked for it. Sometimes she'd move a bucket closer to where he stood, as if she understood his thinking. Something unspoken had grown between them. Not passion, not romance, but a kind of partnership forged not in words, but in labor, silence, and breath. One evening he showed her his experiment. A makeshift moisture collector cloth, driftwood, glass, and time. He explained it to her slowly, how the dunes held more water than they seemed, how if collected properly they might sustain life in ways no one thought possible. She listened quietly, her face lit only by the soft glow of the oil lamp. And when he finished, she smiled. Not the smile of someone impressed, but the smile of someone seen. "You're not just surviving anymore," she said. "You're building something." He nodded. In a strange, impossible way, the pit had become a laboratory, an ecosystem, a home. And yet, some nights just before sleep, he would still dream of city lights, of windows that opened to noise, not wind, of polished shoes, of trains, timetables, elevators. But in the dream, he was always late, always lost. And when he woke, the sand felt softer. He began to wonder, perhaps this too was a kind of freedom. Not the freedom of escape, but the freedom of acceptance, of finding meaning in repetition, in cycles, in dust. One night he asked the woman, "Do you think people need to be free to be happy?" She stirred the coals of the fire. "I think," she said, "people need to believe they chose the life they're living." He sat with that. Let the words seep in like warm water through dry earth. He had not chosen the pit, but now he chose to remain. And as the wind sighed across the rim above him, and the darkness folded gently around the house, he found himself asking, what if escape was never the point at all? What if the meaning of life is what you build when you stop running from it? The wind had been quiet for 2 days. A strange, unnatural calm, in a place where the sand always moved, where it whispered, hissed, sighed. Its sudden silence was almost too loud. Junpei noticed it first through the texture of the air. It felt heavier, the grains finer, as if the dune was holding its breath. The woman noticed too. She said nothing, but she began sealing the edges of the hut more carefully. She packed jars tighter, tied cloth over their supplies. A storm was coming, but it wasn't just the weather. Junpei felt it somewhere deeper. In the shift of his thoughts, the return of questions he thought he had buried. What would happen if he left now? Could he leave now? Would the outside world still recognize him? Would he? One afternoon, while clearing sand from the western wall, he found something buried, a rusted tin box half eaten by the earth. Inside a few old photographs, faces he didn't know. A child, a man, the woman perhaps, younger. He showed it to her that evening. She took the box without a word. "I had a husband once," she said. The admission hung in the air, unexpected and heavy. "He was brought here too. Not like you. He came to help fix the slope. Stayed 3 years, then One morning he climbed out. Junpei waited, but she didn't finish the story. Did he go back? She looked at him. Her eyes were dry but distant. No one knows, she said. Sometimes I think he made it. Other times, I think the sand just swallowed him. They were quiet after that. The oil lamp flickered low, and for the first time in weeks, Junpei felt the weight of the pit again. It wasn't fear. Not exactly. It was something older. A quiet pressure like the past reaching out through the sand. That night, he sat awake long after the woman slept. He listened not to wind, not to storm, but to memory. His old life began to feel like a painting behind glass. Clean, untouched, unreal. This pit, this woman, this endless rhythm of sand and silence. Was it more real than anything he had left behind? Or had he simply forgotten how to want more? His eyes grew heavy. The sand rustled faintly outside. And just before sleep claimed him, he whispered a question into the dark. What if this place wasn't meant to hold me, but to reveal the part of me that never wanted to leave? The storm arrived at midnight, not with thunder, but with pressure, a great weightless crushing, as if the sky had leaned down and pressed its full breath into the dunes. The sand shifted with purpose now. It curled over the rim of the pit like waves on a shore. Each gust swept decades through the air, burying memory, digging up time. Junpei and the woman worked in silence, reinforcing the walls, tying down the roof, emptying buckets as fast as they filled again. There was no space for words, only movement, only breath. By morning the storm had passed, but the pit was deeper now, wider, like a mouth that had opened in the night and changed shape while they slept. Junpei stood at the edge and looked up. The rim had pulled farther away, the rope ladder gone again, and yet he didn't panic. He simply noted it, as one might note a new crack in the floor, or a cloud that passed without raining. Later, as he sat sketching his moisture trap again, the woman came to him. "Why do you still work on that?" she asked gently. "Even now?" Junpei paused. The question surprised him, not because he didn't have an answer, but because he hadn't asked it of himself in days. "I think," he began slowly, "I want to prove that even in a place like this, there's something we can understand, something we can shape." She sat beside him, pulling her knees to her chest. "The sand doesn't care," she said softly. "It buries everything, slowly, patiently." "I know," he replied. "That's why I have to keep going. If the sand never stops, then neither can I." She looked at him not with pity, but with something close to admiration. Not because he resisted, but because he endured. And And then after a long pause, she said something he would carry forever. Maybe meaning isn't what we find. Maybe it's what we make, in the places where no one thought it could exist. The words echoed inside him. Not loud, not dramatic, but like a key sliding quietly into a lock he hadn't realized was closed. That night, as he lay in the stillness, he did not dream of escape. He dreamed of water, gathering slowly in glass jars, enough to drink, enough to share, enough to say, I did something that mattered. The sand no longer seemed endless. It had edges now, not physical ones, but edges of understanding, edges of peace. And as he closed his eyes, Junpei whispered to the darkness almost without thinking, if freedom means meaninglessness, and captivity holds purpose, which would you choose? Morning came without color, just pale light slipping slowly into the pit, soft as breath, quiet as regret. Junpei no longer rose with alarm. His body knew what the day required. So did his mind. He fetched the water, checked the jars, marked the rise of moisture on the thin glass tubes he had fashioned. His trap was working. The desert air gave up its secrets slowly, drop by drop. He smiled not with triumph, but with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had earned the right to smile. The woman watched him. You're different now, she said. He looked up from his work, curious but not defensive. Different how? You don't look up anymore, she said. Not toward the rim. Junpei paused. He hadn't noticed it, but she was right. His eyes stayed low now, focused, grounded, not from defeat, but from clarity. I suppose I don't need to, he said. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. There was a peace between them now, a rhythm, a wordless understanding, like two waves folding into one tide. That evening, after the work was done, they sat by the lamp again, sharing tea in silence. The wind returned gentle this time, not erasing, just brushing lightly against the surface of the world. Junpei turned to her. I used to think freedom meant doing whatever you wanted. And now, she asked. Now I think maybe it means knowing why you do what you do. Even if you don't get to leave. Even if no one sees you. She smiled slow and warm. You sound like someone who belongs here. He looked at her, then really looked, and realized something he hadn't dared name before. He wasn't waiting to escape anymore. He wasn't enduring. He was living. He thought of the pit, the sand, the never-ending shoveling, the droplets gathered in jars, the quiet meals, the quiet woman. He thought of his life before, The train, the clock, the crowded streets. How small it all felt now. How noisy and thin. And then, for the first time, he didn't wish to go back. Not because he was trapped, but because he had outgrown the version of himself that longed to escape. He had come to the pit searching for an insect. He had found instead a mirror, buried in the sand. And now as the stars unfolded slowly above, he let himself wonder, is freedom a place you reach? Or is it simply the moment you stop needing to run? The days continued, but they no longer needed counting. Jumpy woke. He worked. He rested. There was no beginning, no end, only motion, soft and circular, like the wind tracing the edge of the dune. His invention now gathered enough water to fill a bowl each day. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Sometimes he thought, if I ever get out, I'll tell people what I discovered, how the desert can yield life, how even in the deepest, most barren pit, you can find purpose. Other times he wondered if he still wanted to leave at all. Then one morning, weeks or maybe months later, a figure appeared at the rim. A man, a villager, calling down with a casual voice. The storm pulled the rope loose, he said. We've come to replace it. You can climb out now, if you like. Junpei stood at the center of the pit, hands buried in warm sand. He looked up at the ladder, sturdy, real, just like the first time. He did not move. The woman didn't speak. She only watched him, her hands still, her breath steady. Junpei raised a hand in thanks, but he said, I have something I want to finish here first. The man shrugged, left the ladder in place, and walked away. The world above waited, but it would wait a little longer. That evening, Junpei returned to his jars. He checked the moisture levels. He adjusted the cloth. He ate dinner with the woman. He smiled when she passed him tea. And later, as they lay side by side, listening to the wind dance gently across the sand, he spoke in a voice soft as sleep. I think I understand now. She turned slightly, eyes half closed. Understand what? The sand isn't the prison, he said. It's just the mirror. And when we stop fighting the reflection, we start to see ourselves. She said nothing, but her fingers found his in the dark and held them lightly, like the air before rain. Outside, the dunes rose and fell, eternal patient breathing. And somewhere in that quiet space between thought and dream, between choice and surrender, Junpei finally let go, not of hope, but of needing anything more than this moment. The pit didn't feel deep anymore. It felt wide, expansive, infinite. because now he carried the sky within him, and as sleep wrapped itself around his limbs, and the sand whispered its final lullaby, a single question slipped through the stillness. If a man finds meaning where no one else dared to look, has he ever truly been lost at all? That brings us to the end of our story. Thank you for listening, and I hope to see you again for future stories.